for our republic. This failed insurrection only underscores how crucial the task before us is for our republic.
That is how longtime Trump ally and self-described Grim Reaper Mitch McConnell first condemned that MAGA riot at the Capitol. Within hours of the attack, you saw him there bluntly saying what it was, an insurrection. It was the first sign McConnell may shift from 5 years of publicly backing Trump. Tonight, the news more ominous for Trump, who leaves office headed directly for a trial for high crimes in the Senate, where McConnell is turning from ally to skeptical juror. So amidst everything else going on in Washington today, there are new signs of how Trump's trial may go as McConnell and Schumer, the incoming leader of the Senate, spoke today about organizing the next Senate and COVID and this trial, with McConnell making news by suggesting Trump may be guilty. The trial is over one question. Did Donald Trump incite the Capitol riots? Here's McConnell going farther than he's ever gone, saying Trump provoked the riots.
The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people. And they tried to use fear and violence to stop a specific proceeding of the first branch of the federal government, which they did not like. But we pressed on. We stood together and said an angry mob would not get veto power over the rule of law in our nation, not even for one night.
That's the sound of Republican leader McConnell making the thrust of the argument that the Democratic impeachment managers will make. Trump did it. Here's that key part again.
They were provoked by the president and other powerful people.
If the Senate does conclude that Trump did it, caused the riot, that is constitutionally enough for conviction, and then a separate vote would be held on whether to ban Trump from running again. That would be game over. Now, does that mean this is all over? No. Have you met Mitch McConnell? He is canny. He notoriously keeps his options open. Now, today, the news is McConnell did go farther than most elected Republicans have to blame Trump for the violent riot, for the insurrection. But he also carefully used the word provoke, not the word incite from the actual impeachment charge. If Republicans get the votes and they convict, McConnell can claim he led this march for accountability, including what he said today. But if he backs down and ultimately votes to acquit Trump, McConnell can legally claim that while he condemned Trump for provoking this, maybe he doesn't believe that Democrats ultimately proved their case to the high standard of inciting it. We are joined now by NYU law professor Melissa Murray and Morgan State University professor Jason Johnson. Good day to both of you. Jason, let's start with the politics, because it is Mitch McConnell we're talking about. What do you think he's up to here?
Mitch McConnell is playing the press, he's playing Republicans, and he's playing Democrats all at the same time, because he may be the Grim Reaper, but he's a very smart guy. By saying up front, okay, Donald Trump, it was a part of this, Donald Trump provoked these people one way or another, he's giving himself sort of the air of credibility, right? It's like, look, hey, I can acknowledge the facts. I'm not a crazy right-wing Republican. He's setting the stage for looking like a reasonable negotiator going forward. But as you mentioned, Ari, by not saying incite and using the word provoke, that's the kind of wiggle room that a guy like Mitch McConnell will end up using. You know, we didn't start the fire. It was always burning. It was incited by this. It was provoked by that. That's the kind of nonsense weaseldom that he's going to use and that other Republicans will use, because we saw similar things with last year's impeachment, literally at this point last year. Well, Donald Trump did something that was terrible. He did something to violate the spirit of his job. He did something to try to overturn an election. He abused his power, but we don't know if that's quite impeachable. And that's what I think he's doing right now. Chuck Schumer would be absolutely foolish to think that what Mitch McConnell did is a sign that 18 Republicans are going to vote to convict.
So you're skeptical. You also, I believe you were throwing in Billy Joel?
Yes, I was.
Strong. You never know where he's going to go, Professor. Both of you professors, but I mean Professor Murray. You never know where he's going to go. So whether or not they started the fire will be litigated through this constitutional process. And Professor Murray, I now, having done a little bit of the politics, turn to you on the Constitution. What does it mean when House managers say they think there's a high crime committed by Donald Trump in inciting this violence. And is Mitch McConnell onto something by trying to make gradations, or whatever he may later claim, is that not really the point?
Well, this should take us back to this time last year. This is a perennial question, indeed one that has long been burning since the world's returning. Whether or not what the president has actually done has risen to the level of a high crime or misdemeanor. It doesn't have to be an actual statutory crime. And I think most would agree that there is less gray room here than there was a year ago. Triggering a rebellion against the Congress would certainly fall into the category of a high crime or misdemeanor. As to whether that's enough to bring 18 senators along, that's a very different matter. And again, this is not like a criminal trial where the prosecution has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. Here, all that is required is for each senator to be satisfied as to her own conscience as to whether or not the standard for impeachment has been met. So not only has McConnell given himself some wiggle room, he's given some wiggle room to the rest of his caucus as well.
Right.
But you see, just briefly, Professor Murray, you see that wiggle room as going initially right now against Trump as compared to the last trial.
Well, I think there is much less gray area here. I mean, last time there wasn't a trial, there weren't witnesses. It was hard to tell if the phone call regarding the events of the Ukraine really did happen as some of the witnesses in the oversight hearings had claimed. And here we know what happened. We have it on video. We saw the president saying these things. We saw what followed. There's far less wiggle room here to link the president with the events that actually happened on January 6th. Like, there's a very clear nexus. That wasn't necessarily the case before.
Right.
Yeah, and while many people thought it was a bad defense to say last time, oh, the president demanded an illegal probe into his rival, Joe Biden, who's now replacing him, but it never happened, that was a bad defense if it was still an attempted potential high crime. But as you point out, Professor, you certainly have a stronger evidentiary argument when the thing was both fomented, requested, and happened. We all lived through Wednesday. Another person that's coming in, and this could end up being potential evidence at the trial, is, of all people, Bill Barr. Take a listen.
Right.
Perhaps the debate about the integrity of the election was the final straw.
I think that was the thing that precipitated the riots on the Hill. Now, I think it's always important to remember that most people are exercising their First Amendment rights, but there was a substantial group, obviously, that went far beyond that and broke into the Capitol and tried to interfere with the proceedings, and that's unacceptable.
Jason, what's important here is not how annoying some of the other word salad is, but that even Bill Barr, who's known as the most partisan and loyal lawyer that Donald Trump could find and install at the DOJ after many efforts, is saying something similar to what McConnell's saying, what Professor Murray just walked us through, which is that thing happened and they did cause that thing. The election lies that others tried to downplay, say, well, let him have his time to absorb, actually, according to Bill Barr, quote, precipitated the insurrection, Jason.
Yeah, and Bill Barr was one of the people who did an investigation for Donald Trump and say, hey, look, we didn't find any sort of election difficulties, any sort of cheating one way or another. He was not going to participate in the silly process afterwards. And what I think is really interesting is, again, when we look at the notion of this trial, every single person who's voting is also a witness, which is not what you would have in most trials, right? Everyone there is like, yeah, we were in the Senate when this actually happened. If this were a Law and Order episode, there'd be a special witness. They would bring in Mike Pence. Mike, did you hear? Did security tell you that they were screaming, hang Mike Pence? So this is kind of a different situation where the senators can try and dance around like Bill Barr and create word salad, but none of them can say it didn't happen. None of them can say they weren't afraid. The only thing that they can say at this particular point is they somehow don't hold Donald Trump responsible. But unlike last year, where they can say, well, it was a perfect phone call, we don't know what happened in the phone call, none of these people who are going to be speaking can claim that they were not terrified for their very lives and that they didn't see crowds of people outside threatening and building gallows and calling for their deaths.
Professor Murray, since we have you here, any quick thoughts on what is rumored to be a potentially large number of pardons that could come down any time before Trump formally becomes an ex-president tomorrow?
Well, I think we're all bracing for pardon palooza, and I think it'll be big. To be clear, though, there are lots of ways that presidents can wield this clemency power. And one of the ways that they can do so is to sort of indicate policy preferences. Like, for example, Obama granted pardons to those who were convicted of low-level drug offenses. We're not seeing that here. There's no policy agenda being advanced other than that which suits the president. These are individuals who have been close to the president, who have access to his allies, and those are the ones who are getting this kind of consideration right now. That's not the way this was meant to work.
Professor Murray, with important context on the news that may be coming, we'll have it for you if it breaks tonight. And Jason Johnson, thanks to both of you for two angles on the McConnell story.